right, you have Finno and T here with episode 3 of the Market Thieves Podcast. On this podcast, we're going to be going over blockchain, explaining blockchain. We're here with Matt today, and he's going to help us break it down.
Welcome back to the Market Thieves Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about blockchain, and as blockchain and mining pertains to the rest of the industry, where the industry is headed, and how blockchain can basically be integrated into different systems and companies and industries worldwide to sort of streamline everything in investing and such. So today, obviously, you have myself, T, my co-host, Finno. Finno, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Very good. And today we are joined by our good friend Matt, and Matt's going to sort of take it over and tell how he got into the crypto space himself.
Hi guys. Thanks for having me here today. So a little bit how I got into crypto. I remember, I think in college, a friend of mine had owed me $20 over like a lunch or something, and I really didn't care. I said, don't worry about it, but he wanted to send it back to me in some way, somehow. And so he sent me some Bitcoin, and I didn't think much of it on Circle at the time when you could trade on Circle. And I completely forgot about the account, and I didn't even think about it. But I had kind of followed it here and there, and I'd dabbled and bought some things, and then just was off my radar for like a year or two. And I read the headline that Circle was getting out of the trading game, and I was like, oh yeah, I got that Bitcoin. I gotta go get that $20 out. It was like $5,000, and I was like, oh, cause like I really need to pay more attention to this. And so that my personal interest grew from there, and I was like, all right, well, this is only gonna get bigger and better. And then I got a great call from my mentor, and he asked me to come join him at this company called Iconic Holdings, Frankfurt-based company, amazing company. They're doing really cool things in the crypto space, led by a guy named Patrick Lowry and Dominic Ward, awesome, and Max. And so they're all there out in Frankfurt, and Dominic's in New York. And essentially they're creating a multi-manager platform for crypto hedge funds. A big constant problem you see in the crypto space is these hedge funds have like relatively low AUMs. And on top of that, a lot of that AUM is like founder capital. So, and they typically won't meet the hurdles that are needed to be able to raise money at an institutional level. So I think putting them under one umbrella in which like everything is legitimized and everything is up board and meets regulatory requirements is going to be a huge value for people who eventually want to like have access to these crypto hedge funds. So keep an eye out for that with Iconic Holdings. But when I had joined them, I was working kind of as helping them get their accelerator up and going. Unfortunately, that was right when crypto winter started. But it was a great learning experience. I loved it. Love those guys. They're doing really cool things. Ended up having to part ways for like personal reasons, and then I went back into private equity. But still have my eye on crypto and still love it, and still think it's the future of everything that we're going to see.
All right, yeah, we're happy to have you on to join us on today's discussion. We're going to be basically segueing into the ledger, which is going to be the first portion of the podcast today. Last time we left off with the Satoshi white paper and just sort of the origin of Bitcoin with Genesis block. But when a lot of people get into the crypto space, they really only think sort of investing in coin, and then that's it. They don't really necessarily understand that there's a whole world beyond this, and there's so many use cases that this space could have with the cryptocurrencies and the tokens that are built on top of the bones, which is the blockchain. So that's one of the pillars that we want to talk about definitely in the beginning of this is before we move into why you should invest, is the technology that's surrounded by this sort of very new and growing and exciting space. So basically the last time we talked about the white paper, we talked about the ledger. Basically, the ledger, if you will, is a piece of paper that's put inside of a paper box or a cardboard box. The box is what you could call the blockchain. And on that ledger is going to be a plethora of things, but it's basically going to be a record. And once that record is sealed and signed, sealed, delivered, and solidified and verified, you could imagine that box is closed and a new box is placed next to it and opened up for a new ledger to be placed inside and verified as well. So this is sort of like the bare bones of this technology, but there's so many different things that you can do with it, and that's where you get into scalability. It's how many places can we take this? But today we're going to talk about what it takes and also the impact that it has on industries, for better or worse, but where the space could go in the future. So I think the first thing is to talk about the miner's role. So, of course, Matt had mentioned earlier, back in the day, Bitcoin basically had a very small value, which is definitely night and day compared to what it is now, just a short step into the future. But to sort of piggyback off of that, back in the day, people were able to mine and sell coin on the internet on very simple machines, home computers, etc. Did you know anyone that was mining around you at the time? Did the gentleman that gave you the coin instead, was he mining himself?
I'm not sure if he was mining, but it's funny to think everyone says they were mining back then now, right? And they say, oh, I had 1,000 Bitcoin and I sold it. And whether that's true or not, it doesn't really matter. I think it was a testament, I think, to people who had a lot of faith and were kind of tweaking around with technology and curious what they could create. Mining has come a long way. I think as much as people talk about how much Bitcoin adoption has changed, mining has kind of taken almost like an inverse thing. It's used to be like the people's tool and anyone could do it, and to some extent that's still true, but the barriers to entry now and the large incumbents at play are kind of mind-blowing. I think you probably have more facts and details on that than I could never rattle off right now. But
yeah, so as Matt was saying, the journey of it has come a long way in the beginning, and we could just sort of break it down to basics for those of you who are I do hear the term miner come up. What actually is it that they do? Well, it's a community of individuals that host a host of mining computers that solve blocks. So in order for the block to progress forward, it has to be solved, and that is the miner's job, to solve the block. And rewards are given for solving the block, and it's a very sort of collection of space now. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the actual coin. It could be rewards and tokens and things like that, to sort of integrate in the community of whatever that blockchain is. So it's also important to understand that there's different blocks out there now. It's not necessarily the block that's attached to Bitcoin. The blockchain technology spans within many different coins and tokens that are built on top of them. So say, for example, you also probably hear about Ethereum as much as you do Bitcoin these days. Their blockchain is totally different. Their rewards are different. The program is different for them as well.
One of you guys explained to me, I'm familiar with the proof of work, but when it comes to proof of stake, I understand the basics. How does that translate when you stake? How does that create nodes, and how does that create, how does that just solve the problem that solving the block? How does that work?
So I think the incentive structure around proof of stake is that to legitimize a transaction, you're willing to risk your capital, right? And so I think it'd be the same as if every time someone did anything in the real world, let's try and put it in as much as this is a new paradigm for anything, but for everything, I think let's put it in the context of the world we live today. It'd be like, you do a wire transfer, in order for it to be valid, or instead of relying on the bank, it'd be you found 30 people to put up $20 to say it's legit, right? I think that may be a gross oversimplification of it, but that's kind of how I think of proof of stake, and that makes a lot of sense.
And then you reward the incentive them. A transaction fee? Is that what is still similar?
But you reward them with you reward their stake with your fees on the chain. So, let's think about that creatively. Is that okay? So, which one would you be more willing to participate in, right? So would you be willing to be constantly staking your tokens to make the system work, or would you be willing to run a node to make the system work? Because when I think about the how these things will grow, it's about people participating, right? So people get discouraged because they don't want to run a node because it's too small and it's just in there burning a bunch of, and they probably won't make money on it. But
Right.
I think there is like a social kind of responsibility, if you do believe in crypto, to find some ways to contribute to the ecosystem. And I think if that means like running a Lightning node or something like that, that's great. And that would be my call to action for anyone. And I'm still trying to get mine as efficient as possible, but it's fun to do it. And you learn more. I think it gets you excited and you want to be learning more as much as you can, because there's so much to learn in this space.
And could you sort of explain what that entails as far as like you getting into that space? Like for the viewers, if they say, for example, wanted to also answer that call.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's you could go out and probably drop like a couple $1,000s and get a full GPU rig and mine away and just churn electricity out like no other, and do that. And some people should do that, and people will get pleasure out of doing that and join a mining pool and get rewarded and do the proof of work and all that. But and then there's also like, you could go maybe like for like $200 you can go buy like a Raspberry Pi and help run the Bitcoin Lightning Network, and that would also be a learning experience.
But so mining is the process of confirming transactions on the blockchain, and what that process is solving cryptographic hash puzzles, which is way above my pay grade. So just really hard puzzles that a computer could solve. And it is the more mining power that is put into the network, so saying the more people mining, the more computers that are in the network, the harder it is to quote unquote solve the problem. And what this takes care of when you talk about mining is, well, in the case of Bitcoin or say proof of work, it helps keep inflation in check. So you have incentives go down when you have the halvening every, is that 4 years?
Kind of, yeah.
So there's, what the theory is there's more as time goes on, as we get closer to the end of hitting the supply, we have more computing power on the network. And so what that does is, for someone like me who thought I could maybe grab a rig a couple months ago, I have to fight, let's say like a country that has tens of thousands of rigs in a warehouse running off energy that's way more efficient than me just paying for my electricity bill at the house. So they might be able to do, say, let's just make an easy number, 10 Bitcoin a week, when I probably might be able to do that in 6 months if I have the power to run it.
And you also have to take into consideration that the edge of difficulty moves forward every so amount of blocks. So for Bitcoin, every 2,000 blocks, which at this point is about every 14 days, protocols and adjustments are made.
And that's because, when you were talking about the ledger, when you're still creating a new block, everything on that ledger from the very first transaction gets carried on and keeps moving forward as we keep going. So the difficulty of that.
It also adds a sense of security, so it doesn't necessarily give people enough time to sort of figure out ways to game the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would challenge you to have a more collaborative mindset on it. I think, you could be, if you're one against the world trying to think you're going to mine the next block, like, good for you, like, good luck. But I think the idea should be more like, my rig can make the system stronger, right? And you can join a mining pool and share rewards. And I think that's more the upside than.
Yeah. So now that we talk about that, from the beginning in 2009, when it all started, you would have CPU mining. So I would have my laptop or my computer at home, and maybe I was paying rent and utilities were included. I could mine. It was very easy. The difficulty was very low at the time. There was less nodes on the network trying to solve these problems. So very easy. Let's say 2 years down the road, you have something called GPU mining, which would be like when you're a gamer, you have these graphics cards, which would be about 30 times the processing power of your standard CPU computer. And that went on for a few years, and it was successful, so you could still individually do it. I would say, collectively, maybe everyone in the house has a computer and they all, divulge their time to that. And then shortly after that, something called FPGA mining. Let's just say it was 100 times faster than a GPU. and you would connect this external piece to your computer that you would run, and then like I said, 100 times faster. So maybe, you had 4 GPUs running the house. Now you have one of these connected, and you could still maybe individually be successful. And then around 2013, you had something called ASIC, which are now specific pieces of equipment that are made specifically for mining. And we're talking, well, that stands for Application Specific Integration Circuit. And that's now the current standard that we see. So the past 7 years, now you have big companies putting thousands of these computers together, and this means that the number of new miners goes down, but the number of computers you could do the work for what you had individually back in the day. And then that could bring you to a point now, if you were an individual, there's now mining pools which you can bind your computing power, and maybe most of a normal individual have a CPU or GPU, where you save up money and you get an ASIC, and you join this pool, and depending on the hash rate that you contribute, and we're talking big numbers for some of them, small numbers for other, but whatever percentage of the power you put in is the percentage that you get back when a new block is solved for the mining, which is a common way now. And that being said, there are several ways you could do that. There's cloud mining, which is kind of sketchy. You could, even if you wanted to, run mobile mining on your phone. And then there's some new stuff going on where, called web mining, where people actually will say, hop on, you're playing Halo online or something, and they could hijack your computer speed and run off of your own computer. All of those are 3 not the most profitable ways. I would even say mining pools aren't the most profitable, but for an individual to get into that space, that is the easiest way for access.
Yeah, I mean, that basically sums it up like A to Z perfectly. And just to sort of give people that are listening an illustration, most of the mining farms now will sort of take what Fenno mentioned, sort of like if you could imagine a gaming computer, but the only thing you put in it was 6 GPUs, or in that case, or, for those of you who game on a PC, sort of taking a computer case and putting 6 GPUs inside of them, and then taking that and multiplying it by, hundreds and thousands. And that's sort of what you get the visual halls of what these large farms look like. And then a lot of them will also run their own software. So say, for example, you're thinking, man, that's got to be a absolute nightmare to have that many GPUs, which would if one of them goes faulty. Well, most of these mining farms that mine on that scale will use their own software. So say, for example, if one GPU is faulty, it does mess with the operation. So what the software will do is it's going to highlight that GPU particularly, and depending on how the people organize the farm, they could just simply go down that aisle and pull out that computer in particular and fix that GPU. So when we think about mining, even on a scale that large, you could think that is cumbersome, but if you have the wherewithal, take the time to take a look at how these farms are set up. It's very impressive for what the space is at currently. Most of them are going to be sort of in colder climates, if they have the ability to do so in that particular nation. And then you're also going to be taking a look at places that electricity is extremely cheap, like Matt was mentioning in some points earlier. So, it's not to discourage people from not mining, but you also have to take a look at where the space is right now. And as Fenno was mentioning, it's either going to be mining farms like this that are developing or producing extremely high hashing power, or, as Matt mentioned earlier, having the wherewithal to take the responsibility in your own hands and contribute to the hashing power of a group of people who come together to keep moving this thing forward. And that's what makes this space so special, is it's that it's really up to everyone to keep the space moving forward, and to not get discouraged and not do it. Otherwise, sort of, the blocks don't necessarily get solved if people just sort of threw their hands up and said no more. So whether you're on the side of being in a farm, working in a farm, or you're just sort of, I guess we could consider it a at home or miner, then you're basically contributing to the space altogether regardless. But some key highlights is, I'm pretty sure most of you have read articles about how much power it takes to run a farm like this, how much electricity it does take to run something at home. And we also, before we start making these points, we have to recognize that this space is so young, and at one time all technology was cumbersome before it was sleek and sexy. So Matt, did you want to add anything? Or
I just had a question. Do we know how much of the mining rewards are kept versus sold? Or?
Like, say for the bigger projects, a lot of them were very tight-lipped about all of their numbers and things like that. And I think it was most of the articles I read because of investor interest and things like that. If we scaled it down to what someone is rewarded for, or what a group of people are rewarded for mining a single Bitcoin, some of these bigger operations are mining 600 or 700 Bitcoin a month, 20 Bitcoins a day. So the price that Bitcoin's at right now, that's a lot of money. And it's also a very, very expensive feat to even run something that large scale. One of the facts that I was stumbling upon was the mining farm in the United States up in Seattle, Gigawatt, to run that operation is $1 million plus per month. Is his rent and his fee of getting and keeping the whole thing going, his overhead costs essentially. So really the only solution is to look for solutions. So most countries are looking to colder climate areas. Say for example, some of the largest farms in China are up in the mountains. We also have a really large farm in Iceland called Genesis Mining. Obviously more cold climates. Taking a look at spaces and places that we haven't necessarily utilized, like Antarctica, the different outlook versus just basically having this huge carbon footprint and not doing anything about it, but also trying to, I wouldn't say push, but trying to introduce this technology to other people and, having this conversation as well, because we can all say that we live in a world where we should care about the planet, not to get a little political, etc. But that is one of the bigger drawbacks that people have when you
went there.
when you do introduce this space to individuals, because we do deal with a lot of sensationalized journalism, and of course they're going to, sort of point out these things. So it's, to sort of combat that is that it's not something that's making this footprint and nothing's being done about it. I think everybody that's in this space understands that it takes this much, and we are, trying to come together to look for solutions for it.
How much of that is hardware, not being optimized for this yet versus, I imagine if you're running a giant farm, it's more efficient
This is my little 2 cents on it. Well, you could say, well, let's talk about mining. In general, there's mining where we strip mine and we rip apart the environment, the physical environment that we see. And, when we talk about environmental impacts, for me, the key thing is is it wasteful? Is it being used efficiently? If you look at mining and we're looking for gold, if we're looking for coal, whatever it is, and we're stripping away the environment physically, I think that's very wasteful. But when you have something, say, like Genesis, or somewhere in Russia, or something that's up in the mountains, out of the way, it's in a nice, let's call it a nice barn-looking warehouse. Yeah, we're using the energy consumption, but is it being wasted? If it's there on the grid, is it being wasted? It's being paid for. It's being taken care of. It's not an eyesore. It's not degrading the environment per se. We're not, like that's my big argument, and what you were just saying, and I don't know what you were alluding to, but that's how I conceptualize
No,
it.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think we have to think of let's look for, like, ahead, like 15 years, right? Let's assume we move to a cashless society. Like, how much paper will that save, right? So, if you look at Bitcoin from that perspective, yeah, I would like to think it's only going to get better. And like you had mentioned earlier, every technology at some point is like wasn't pretty or had some challenges. Like, I wouldn't want to be the first guy who tested the elevator, but like I'm saying,
Right.
where Bitcoin's going, it has to get better, right? Because I think the technology has proven that it's the best way to do it, and I think it's the most secure way to do it. So the question, and maybe the next big wave, will be hardware efficiency, right? And so, because this isn't so much of a software issue, it's more of like, well, to some extent it is, because I think you have the difficulties of the blocks has kind of been predetermined and kind of set, so you can't really change that. So we got to look at the levers. I don't know, we can pull to make it better, right? So
And I like that, and with time, they become the computers now. There's specific uses for them, and then I think it becomes a geographical issue at the next point. Then is when you can get that technology that's specific for exactly what you need, efficiency wise and power wise and everything like that. You just look at, there's plenty of areas and locations with excess energy. There's plenty of areas that have abundant natural resources. That's why Iceland's an ideal place. It's geothermal. You're using all this stuff that's given to us, and it isn't in abundance, which is, and if you want to use it and use it in the right way and use it for something that is good, I think that's, you'll just slowly see these places like Iceland becomes a hub, or I know like Texas right now is looking, because they have cheap energy. And so I mean that's the thing. Like you said, if you want to talk about what goes on with mining versus what goes on in traditional banking, and you have to think of, you have the banks, you have all the bank servers, you have the ATMs. So what's the energy consumption there? And then you have to think of, okay, well, when you go to the bank or use an ATM, what do you do with that receipt? Where does it go? That is the wasteful part that I see, that blockchain, Bitcoin, whatever you want, crypto, that's what I think saves face on. And then, and that has the correlation with that is you use more energy, but you could find it in a more useful, meaningful, less wasteful way.
Yeah, and it goes back to the saying, it's like where there's space, there's opportunity. So like, the guy that runs the mining farm in Washington State is currently taking the sort of value that he's gained, the knowledge that he's gained from running a farm of his own, to try to develop his own GPU, also with the capital that he has come into over the last couple of years of owning his own farm. And I'd like to believe that most of the larger farms are taking a look at that to say, like, okay, how do we constantly improve the space? And like Matt was saying, it's not necessarily a software issue, it's a hardware issue. So, what about, and this could be something that like is probably impossible now, or it could be possible, or it's something that someone's working on, but GPUs that run on less electricity, or something that's a little more streamlined, that's not necessarily using so much power, because they have to have so many inside of one space, or instead of using 6 GPUs, having larger ones made that are probably something that's so new that we haven't ever seen. I mean, I know in the gaming space, the graphics cards tend to continuously move forward in technology. So I'd like to believe that in the crypto space, depending on what cards or what hardware they're using, those pieces of technology continuously move forward in a way where it's just like each time it becomes less and less cumbersome, it becomes less and less wasteful, if you will. There's other facets of this I know you wanted to go over.
I was going to say I had healthcare is a good one, and I was going to completely integrate that with the supply chain of drugs. And you could talk about like the vaccines right now.
Yeah.
And you have a problem with excess vaccines or all this kind of stuff. And, you just record the trades and the transactions, the distribution, the creation on the blockchain, and that's a fully transparent, verifiable record. And, you could even do that. I had an example like, say, diamonds. You want to get rid of blood diamonds, quote unquote. This is another thing that would help with the supply chain from when it gets mined to when it hits the hand when you get married or something like that. That's a big thing. And I also think one of the biggest issues, and it's kind of cool to see like how Bitcoin's been accepted into like more third world countries, like especially in like Africa or somewhere in South America, that property records, when there's turmoil within the governments or in federal, local levels or whatever it is or not, your family owned this plot of land since the beginning of time. It would cost down on the title research, on the insurance for the property. It'd help you prove ownership in unstable places, and it helps with prosperity and in these in places where it's hard to make a dollar. But you have all this land, and this is something that I think is a great issue that blockchain solves in being available to the people, And then Kudzi could speak on this more, because this is pretty much how big way how he got into it is remittance. Like you go to the bank and I want to take out $50 and they're going to charge you $60 to take that $50 out. And, he could speak later on that, but that's another one. And one that's big right now that I'll just speak on because that's what's going on. It's intellectual property, especially for artists or creatives, where you could ensure compensation for creators of value by using smart contracts. And that's why we see these things right now, NFTs with digital pieces of art being created with smart contracts, and you're seeing artists create wealth that's as high as it's ever been for a living artist currently. So those are just a few things. And I mean, it's pretty crazy. I didn't really understand when I was buying into crypto and whatnot. And once you dig in the blockchain, it makes it really interesting, and you want to keep digging and seeing what comes up, what you can learn. And yeah, like Matt said before, it's growing, and it's fun to do the research.
I am bullish on like, I think using the blockchain to replace ledgers. I think there's so many use cases. I think like licenses and birth records and things like that. Like you lose like your birth record, it's a headache to get a new one.
Social security card.
Yeah, all that. But I think there's a legitimate argument about the Oracle issue. So the Oracle problem being is that something is legitimate on chain doesn't necessarily mean it reflects like the real world actions of it. So like to your point about a blood diamond, like it doesn't take much for someone to punch in that this was sourced from here and then forever it's immutable on the blockchain, then you have something that's not necessarily entirely authentic. So I think you're going to have that issue, and it's not an issue to be discouraging, because like right now the alternative is a piece of paper and someone saying that's true. So
that's like these NFTs, like what's, you could duplicate this. How do you verify it, or how do you know it's a legitimate original piece, or like that's a good point.
Yeah, we're throwing NFT just to make sure listeners know it's non-fungible tokens. And so a non-fungible token is typically associated or tied to some item or artwork, and the token legitimizes that piece as being the like only one, or the one of a limited run. And so and because it's tied to a token as a transact, you can follow the lifetime of that artwork, compared to like today's world, where if an artist makes a piece and they sell it at auction, let's say for like $1,000, and then
$69 million,
and then 10 years later someone buys it for $50 million, the artist gets really not much other than kind of the notoriety for their next pieces. Whether it's not necessarily like the best way to do things. I think it cuts the creative out of like their rewards. I think where I do see an exciting use of NFTs is in music, right? So like you don't buy albums anymore, but if you were to like create NFTs or or tokenize albums, like then you could actually revert to a world where you stream and buy albums, and then the people who buy the album could like potentially profit off the streams of the album they own. And there's just so many things you could do with it, right? So like, but where I'm going with this is going back to where I'm going. This is the Oracle issue, right? So until I think we have a sensor-laden world, or like everything can be recorded in the physical world into the digital world, I think you're going to have issues with that, right? And so knowing that, I'm much more excited about things that are physically immutable. Like I can't pick up and take like your farm, right? Like if you do
you on this topic, what's the first that you see gets accepted into the use of a blockchain, do you think?
Yeah, so I think things that are tied to like your biometrics, like it's very hard for you to say you're not you, right? Like I think that's important. I think land is huge, particularly in places where it could be easily disputed. Like you have situations all the time where someone living on the land, and then someone else bought the land, and then someone else says they own the land, right? So like you have that happening all the time. So like it's a great use case for that. Academic records I think is helpful. You do see like people trying to deal with that, not to get too political.
Mom and dad would be happy with that.
Yeah, but I also think about it like and this is actually this is one that I heard a couple years ago. I forgot the name of the startup that was working on this, but they were trying to create an international credit score on the blockchain. So like if you leave like the US and go move to another place, like your credit score doesn't necessarily go with you, and so you can have like some serious like challenges. I mean, obviously there are solutions to this that exist, but imagine a world where it's like, okay, like my credit score is as good as here as it is abroad, and that's just helpful for people. I think things like that make a lot of sense. I think the Oracle issue is the question you always have to think like, okay, like it's probably better than like the piece of paper certificate that you're running around, but is it completely solving the problem? And I think if you're honest about that, you're like, no, there's still ways to go. But this is where I'm bullish, right? I think there are a lot of smart people working on a lot of like things that are just gonna blow our minds that can solve these issues, right? So it's not to say pencils down. It's more to say like everyone can be thinking creatively about how to make this better.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast explaining blockchain. If you want, you could go follow us on social media. We're starting to get that going. It's on Twitter and Instagram. It's market_thieves. You can find us there, give us a follow, and hopefully we'll be getting that up and moving with some more information shortly.